welcome back, listeners, to the BizBlend podcast. I'm your host, Sana, as always, and today we are diving into a topic that shakes up a lot of what we think we know about leadership and people at work. Now, listeners, for years, organizations have leaned on psychology, motivation theories, personality tests, engagement surveys, psychometric tests, and all that. So, to try and drive better results. But, let's just think about it. What if that's the wrong lens? What if, in focusing on what's in people's heads, we are missing the most important piece, the value they actually deliver? So, listeners, my guest today has spent 35 years in senior HR roles and as a business owner, seeing both sides of leadership, what works and what falls apart. He has wrestled with the frustrations of mediocre leaders, empty strategies, and surface level fixes that don't get to the heart of performance. And out of that lived experience, he has developed an alternative, value centric leadership. It's bold, it's disruptive, and it challenges some deeply held beliefs. So, let's explore, is it time to move away from psychological platitudes and toward a leadership style that's relentlessly focused on value or not? Let's find out with our incredible guest, Barry Wolfe. So, Barry, welcome to the show, and it is such an honor to have you here with us.
Well, Sana, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be part of your program today.
Yeah, and Barry, and this is a bit shocking. I mean, you argue that psychology doesn't help employees deliver value. That is something, really, really shocking, really surprising, and I'm really curious. Our listeners will be as well. So, what made you realize the traditional methods aren't or maybe weren't working?
Well, I had spent some time. I always had in different companies I worked for. The
Okay.
presidents in several of these were very interested in using personality tests to figure out who should be in what kind of a role. And quite honestly, the most ringing endorsements that those tests would make about people were
Mm-hmm.
um, were frankly around people that, we knew just were not that successful in the roles they were in currently.
Right.
And there similar kinds of issues, and it got me really curious about, uh, what really is the basis for all of this stuff? Where do all the tests come from when we look at competency modeling, for example? Where do we get all this stuff, and what's it based on? And, where's the research, really pointing? Beyond just what you might find in, a purveyor of some of this stuff, what their marketing materials might say. And I had spent several years, in a pretty deep dive into this topic, and
Okay.
I was honestly pretty stunned to learn about the story of just how we got this stuff and, and what even among psychologists, what they talk about in terms of the efficacy of some of these things. And 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 not least of which, by the way, is the remarkable degree of, frankly, confusion about the basic concepts that these, um, tools are supposed to be helping us understand. We all, look at psychology and call it a science, and we think of it as a science in the same way as we do, what split the atom, what, cured polio, things like this. But actually, uh, what I learned in working through these questions, there is no scientific consensus around what is intelligence, around what is motivation, what is job performance. There are a multiplicity of these, and the ironic thing, of course, is that it's this very multiplicity of approaches and constructs that allows so many companies to sell different types of personality tests and different type of competency models and so forth, and they can all call it the basis of the same science. So, and as a matter of fact, the ironic thing when you think about it would be that if if they were all um, if all of these different tools were um, if sorry about that. If one group, came along and developed and we was able to create a consensus around these questions, what really is intelligence? What really is motivation? If there was a single model, of human personality and so forth, it would be the worst catastrophe imaginable
Yes.
for this whole industry. It would fall apart. So, you know, and you think about, I found one peer-reviewed paper, for example, that says, for example, the concept of motivation at work has 15 different definitions, this fella counted. Could you imagine if we were talking about oxygen in this kind of a way? I mean, that would be just absurd. And that's what we're doing every day, in companies all around the world. We're spending billions and billions of dollars on these tools, and what's remarkable in so many capacities, psychologists have already shown that these things aren't effective, that they don't do what what, the applied psychologists tell us that they do. And the biggest irony, of course, is that employers who are otherwise very, very astute business people who watch their dollars and,
Yeah.
or their rupees. Are you still using rupees? I'm so embarrassed to ask you that, but, or whatever currency, you're using. I'm so
Yeah.
sorry. That's terrible. But,
No worries.
whatever that is, they're, otherwise in everything else, these business leaders that are so careful with their money, when it comes to tools like this, they don't question it. They write the checks all the time and spend all the money, and all the data shows when in the aggregate that, we're not really making any progress in terms of employee satisfaction, in terms of the capabilities of leaders as a result of, leadership development. We're not making really any appreciable progress, but they keep spending the money every year.
Yeah. And this is such a harsh irony, Barry.
Yes,
But
it
I
is.
have to say. I mean, talking about, from the other end of the equation, when we are pitching something to the business leaders, ERPs, financial tools, CRMs, and all that blah blah and everything. Um, it's kind of, each and every feature is tested. Uh, Trials are there, discussions are there. It takes 6 months, 1 year, God knows how much time to close a deal.
Yes.
Um, but for this particular perspective, it's kind of a very harsh irony. Why do you think is it? Is it because it is, it's a very, I believe, very, you know, um, very single, like it's just an objective question, that is it because it's related to people, and maybe most of the leaders or business people, they are actually kind of undermining how much value people can bring into the workforce.
That's an interesting, perspective on it, quite honestly, Sam. I hadn't really thought of it that way. My
Mm-hmm.
own take, at least, is that, you know, I in the first part of my, book around this topic, I talk about the history of just how these tools got into the workplace, at least in the United States, and, what's most remarkable is that it's the most senior business people that just want to adopt this stuff without even without the critical, questioning that they would apply, in every other aspect of any kind of a significant capital expenditure. And I think that really it comes down to a human desire for easy answers to difficult questions. It's we all know the frustrations of a bad hire in the workplace, and employers can be, I think, sometimes sort of desperate about, making a better decision. And when you've got these people coming along and saying, "We can apply science and we can do this better," um, you know, that it's just irresistible to these people.
Yeah.
And, and at the same time, certainly in the human resources world, there are a lot of HR people who have used these tools and those promises to kinda get the raises and promotions. They're telling, their executive leadership, "Hey, we need to be adopting these tools and we'll get better for it." And look, it's all science. So, they've had an interest in that. It's been very good for some people's careers, but, but we just don't seem to really question, what is this really working or not? And it goes all the way back to the very beginning in the early 20th century, around World War One, um,
Okay.
when a set of psychologists developed a set of intelligence tests. They convinced the army that they could weed out, as they put it, weed out the mentally unfit. And they
Mhm.
were all eugenicists, by the way. It was all really kind of a subterfuge, quite honestly, to build up a database for arguing for more eugenics laws in the United States. But in any case, these tests were developed, and then personality tests right alongside of them, with really nobody having any idea what they were doing. And you can all we take it for granted that all these tests are the equivalent of a paper and pencil test. You can ask some questions. Somebody makes a simple scoring choice, and then we can calculate something, and boom, you've just dissected this person's personality. But it was only ever created that way because that was what the U.S. Army was willing to pay for. I mean, it was that simple. But the personality tests were um, as the war was winding down, certain business people who were associated with this realized that there would be real interest in this in the private sector, where at the time we were dealing with a lot of labor unrest as a result of the
Mhm.
draft and the war and everything. So
Mm.
uh, so people just wanted to buy this stuff, but there was no evidence that any of it actually worked. It was never really proven. It was just taken for granted that it did. Um, and even when they were shown that they didn't work, the marketplace wasn't demanding more rigorous demonstrations of it. They just kind of retooled it and went back at it again, and here we are. So it's kinda nuts when you think about it, but, that's how we got here.
Yeah. In fact, I have never thought about it.
Yeah, to be honest with you, my editor did some research for me. I honestly don't think that there is a book. She came back and said, Nobody's written a book on this topic from this perspective, on this relationship between psychology and business." As far as I know, I'm really the only person that's done it. So,
Yeah, yeah. And especially around people because we have uh, we have seen application of psychology in sales or mostly in sales or selling,
yes.
doing business. But I think this is a very, very interesting aspect here, especially when it comes to people. And I think it holds kind of, it increases the relevance to talk about this, especially in this age of digital, all this modern technology and AI, when, we are looking for more and more easier solutions or tools integrated with AI to, give us some easy, quick answers and fixes.
Yes.
Somehow it's kind of, moving away from the fundamentals, from the basics.
You are absolutely right about that, Sana, and I'll tell you, it's very interesting along those
Mhm.
lines. I was, asked by my editor, she said, "You gotta say something in this book about AI." And I was like, "Well, I really don't know what to say that would be kinda still valid in 6 months." And she says, "Well, everybody's talking about AI. You gotta say something about it." Well, I don't. But I did, however, do a lot of, research into it in the last few months, some reading and watching some long form, YouTube content. And what's very interesting, you may have heard this recently, Sam Altman, president of, with the ChatGPT and everything, he said that, he doesn't think that, we're actually going to achieve, artificial general intelligence. And
Yeah.
the reason is, because there are so many different language models, there's so many different models that these different AI companies are using, and it honestly made me, uh realize that, this was the same thing that I was learning in the research I was doing, that, these tests were being done, these intelligence tests of World War I and so forth. A few years after that, there was a symposium of psychologists reviewing these things in the mid-1920s, and number 1, they could not figure out what these intelligence tests were actually supposed to be testing, and they
Oh,
realized, they concluded in their field that they had no consensus as to what intelligence actually is. And 100 years on, I mean, in our own day and age, they still don't know. There's still no consensus. What is it? And we think of it as, it's sold to the business world as, distinct from personality, for example. Is it?
mm,
Nobody really knows. So, it's one of the things, honestly, where I came to believe personally, we're not gonna get to an artificial intelligence. In fact, we really should be calling it, it's kind of a misnomer, I think. We really should be calling it a simulated intelligence because, because at the end of the day, we still don't know what intelligence is. How do you build what you can't understand, you know? Uh,
yeah.
and it's that simple. So which means we're still back to the very difficult questions. Sorry, but there we are.
Yeah, yeah, no, no, yeah. That is true. That is so true. That is so true. This is absolutely logical, because um until I think 10, 15 years back, if I can just extrapolate it to
Yes.
like 20 years back, we were just talking about IQ, um, IQ scores and everything. Now we are talking about EQ, we're talking about
Yes.
intuition, we're talking about servant leadership. I mean, now leadership has different types, and they were all there, but I think the discussion, the conversations, the awareness around all these, I think they're really gaining momentum,
Yes.
and maybe that could be the reason. I mean, the psychologists couldn't come to a consensus when it comes to defining intelligence. So yeah.
Yes. Precisely it. And don't be surprised if in a few years we'll stop talking about emotional intelligence and all the rest of it, because that's not going to get us anywhere.
Mhm.
It's a surprising thing when we think about, I have a whole chapter in my book is dealing with the question of, is psychology actually science at all? And there are a lot of people, I was really actually shocked, but, there are a lot of people who, say it's not. And one of the things that you can notice, um, you look at, for example, in the physical sciences, if you think about how we got to the moon, and you think about, well, what did that take? Well, we had the discovery of calculus, and
Mhm.
we had, chemistry, to build the rockets. So, the engineering came together for the actual
Mhm.
rockets themselves and so forth. So you could think of it like a skyscraper, like every level is indispensable to what comes next.
Mhm.
And it's so everything builds on everything else. If you look at the story of psychology, it doesn't look like that at all, and I don't mean to sound unkind by this, but, if, the physical sciences are kind of a skyscraper, I'm sorry to put it this way, but psychology is really kind of a garbage dump. It's just sort of a bunch of theories that people, they write about it, and everybody writes about it, and they do symposiums about it, and write papers on it each other, and they talk about it in university for a while, and then they all just realize this isn't getting anywhere, and they throw it all out for something else. And you're exactly right. That's ultimately what happened in the 1950s, for example, in the United States. Every school and most employers were doing an IQ testing. Nobody does it anymore because it doesn't really correlate to anything, you know. Um, so, uh, you know, so yeah. So today we're talking about, emotional intelligence. But personally, I just think it's just what we're talking about today, and we'll be on to something else when we realize that we can't formulate any practical applications for this theory. So, we'll be on to another one. Um,
Yeah. And then yeah, of course. I mean, I think this could take hours and hours, but let's talk about your alternative, which is the value centric leadership. Now, I could make a bit of a sense of it, but just to understand,
Sure.
what does it look like in practice, Barry?
Sure. Well, basically, it starts with a it's built around let me frame it for you if I could this way. I came across, there was a survey done, which I think is one of the most important, uh, survey results in the history of employment related,
Yeah.
surveys ever. I really mean this. So while if we think about in the context of how do we help people become more successful? How do we get the right people and all these things that psychology is supposed to be helping us address? So while we're wrestling with all that and spending all this money, the Gallup organization showed in 2024 that only 45% of employees strongly agree with the statement, I know what is expected of me in my job. So, which means
Wow.
55% of our workforce doesn't even know what anybody wants from them. And I will just say in 35 years in human resources and dealing with these kinds of issues, that doesn't surprise me in the slightest. And the worst part of it is, the higher up you go in an organization, I would one of the smartest things I did as a vice president of HR for a nationwide business is I would try to do as many exit interviews as I could. And I didn't do most of them, but I told my staff, hey, when somebody's leaving, let me know if I have a chance. I'd like to talk to them. So,
Yeah.
and what's remarkable is when you, especially the further up you go, with bright people who we spend a lot of money to bring into the business, and they're quitting and how many times some of these people would say, "I just really don't know what the heck I'm doing here." And so when you think about, you know, people can throw rocks at lots of people, probably if you get some hate mail from this podcast, I'm very sorry, but because they don't agree with what I'm saying here. But this is the bigger issue. Even if all that stuff is true, if it's all real and it does everything that they say it does. How could it possibly make a difference in a workplace if over half of your workforce doesn't even know what the heck you want out of them? That's so that's kind of the starting idea and the realization that, the answer can't be a better job description. It just can't. It's gotta be a more fundamental rethinking of how we approach this. So this has taken me several years to kinda work through all of this, but basically, what I've come up with is a nine-step process, and, what I like to think of this in terms of a transformation. So how do you take people from employees doing jobs to
Mhm.
contributors that are delivering results that matter? And in my clients, by the way, we're calling their, we're recasting, throwing out the word employees, and we're using the word contributors because that's what people should be, right? I mean, um, but so it starts with a very simple question. The object of any organization is to create value. So, and we think about value as the things for which people give you money. So we look at what are the things that people give your organization money for. And it's not just your customers, because it's also, if you think about it, who else gives you money? Well, your investors give you money, your bank gives you money, people giving grants, and they're all looking at different things. They're judging the amount and the terms of that money on different aspects of your organization. So what is the value that each of these groups is looking for? And then what are the results that your organization delivers by which these are being achieved? And, then and this is a hard process,
Mhm.
but the end product is typically less than 400 words, and there's not a single sentence. It's mostly just noun phrases, and it's all just compressed into very simple, very clear, unarguable, concepts that your C-suite executives can understand just as well as the 20-year-old machine operator on a production floor. Everybody can get it. And basically, in these 400 or so words, um, everything you think about, everything you spend money on, everything you do lives inside this document somewhere, or it's a waste of time. And from there, we work at helping leaders, on kind of learn to think about things in terms of not what people do all day, but what they deliver.
Yeah.
And so it's the difference between paying a kid to mow your lawn and buying a well-trimmed lawn. I don't care if he drives my tractor around. I wanna buy, in a large sense, I wanna buy a well-trimmed yard. If I could spread some chemical on my yard that would stop my grass from growing, I'd sell my tractor and I'd buy that stuff, you know what I mean? So so what is it we're actually looking to buy from these different jobs? And then we think about, rather than doing a performance appraisal, we think about it in terms of contribution. And that's what we spell out for people, instead of, I mean, you can still do a job description and that's fine, but we develop what I call a success map, something that, an employee could see. You can give this to an employee on day 1 and but it shows people, this is what you deliver in this job, and there are various degrees of that. So you could kinda do better than what we would consider fully successful, like the top 2%. If you really wanna get our attention, you could deliver to this level, and so forth. And you can give somebody these things on day 1, and they can truly understand, what is it I have, because this is something I preach a lot, in that there are, everybody on day 1 has a question that they wanna ask. Then they don't ask it because they don't think they're gonna get an answer. And I've asked groups of even business executives, "What do you think it is?" And they don't answer. And I say, "I promise you, when you hear the answer, every one of you will agree." And then that question is, "What do I have to do to get a raise around here?" And
Yeah.
I I used to think that the reason bosses, because I've worked for great people all my life, but I used to think that
Mhm.
they wouldn't answer that up front because, well, they don't really wanna get tied down, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
They don't wanna make commitment. But here's the thing, if it's a salesperson, what can that person do to get a raise? Everybody knows, we bring in, get sales. Why is the
Mhm.
salesperson the only person that can get that answer? And
That's cool.
and if you can show everybody else day 1, these are the things you put in our hands, you leave on your desk or on the floor when you go home at night, you change out in the wider world. You deliver like this, and that's worth more money to you. And, when you're able to get to that level, we talk a lot about, helping people find meaning in work. This is
Mhm.
where you truly get into what the meaning is in a job, and it helps you understand things in a dramatically different way. I have one client, they have it's an engineering firm, and so they hire these folks to, kind of the low job in that world is to take folks out into, um, overseeing construction sites, and they're just watching to make sure that somebody's getting, um, I say just, their job is to just pay attention to what the construction firm is doing and making sure that they're doing things the way they're supposed to be. And, it doesn't take a lot of training to do it and things like that. But when we did dive into what is the value of this to the organization, and what we realized is that that we can talk about in terms of the activities watching these people, but the company wants to buy a result, and what the company wants to buy is confidence from the client and also from the business leadership, that the construction firm is doing the job appropriately. So these people, we can say, you know, do these things on the work site, ask about this and so forth. But at the end of the day, your job is to make sure that we are confident that everything's being done right, and that the client's being done that way. Now that's a very, very different way of approaching, how do you manage this person? How do you encourage them? How do you grow them? And I have a lot of other examples along these kind of lines, but it's really amazing. But we talked about, the desire in business for
Mhm.
easy answers to hard questions. These are hard questions. Coming up with the success map for that job, was 8 hours of, like, really hard thinking. And there's a lot of other jobs to go through from that, but that's what it is. But once you do the hard thinking up front, everything else becomes much easier. And you don't have to spend so much time in, like, say, classroom leadership development type stuff with managers. It's easier for them to understand the concepts. They understand much better how to engage with these people about the what we're here to deliver. So it helps in that regard, and that it helps you understand that meaning. And if that appeals to somebody, fantastic. And if it doesn't, well, you can go find another job, and we won't waste each other's time. So
Yeah, easy and straightforward.
yeah.
But yeah, I completely get that. And this is because I have been at the both places where I couldn't align with what the company wanted from me. I couldn't contribute, but when I contributed, I definitely got recognized.
Yeah.
There are workplaces where you are working hard, you are delivering outputs, you're delivering results, but still you're not getting recognized. I mean, there are nuances around it, but uh, have you ever, uh, encountered any, leader, or let's say you are, conversing with the HR of that company when you are, sharing this, that this is a bit dehumanizing because it's like just reducing people to outputs. Have you ever encountered this?
No, I haven't. I understand your concern. I would honestly say it is it is helping people become more human. I
Mm,
love and I appreciate um being able to talk about this on a program with yours that's called Healthy Mind. I will tell you, in my years in human resources, I have dealt with bazillions of employee problems. Okay. I've dealt with, bad managers and so forth, and
mhm,
employees who are deeply, deeply frustrated. And more than once had tears and, people crying about their jobs.
mhm,
And um we talk about, you know, what's remarkable is just what you shared about, you're not delivering what people, or I guess maybe, you're delivering, but it's something
mhm,
that somebody else doesn't value.
mhm, mhm.
And the that plays out in so many organizations everywhere. And it takes an immense toll. I don't think most business leaders really appreciate just the sheer hell that kind of situation can create for people. And
Mm,
I honestly think if employers, want to talk. I was listening yesterday to a podcast with an organizational psychologist who said, there's a lot of stress out in the world. And, we
mhm,
should be thinking about, you know, our employees outside of the workplace, and how do we, what are they wrestling with in the rest of their lives? And I just wanted to scream, at my phone. Why don't you just help these people with what's in the job, the third of their lives that the company's actually dealing with? Because that's probably spilling out into an awful lot of the rest of their lives. And it starts with a simple, seriously answering a simple question. What the heck do you want out of these people? What do
mm,
you want to a level that you're willing to give them more money? You'll commit to that up front. I truly believe that you're going to show people this is where you, this is how you become successful here. Here's how you win. And I sincerely believe this is a far more liberating, and honestly, it's a more compassionate approach to people than than what we're doing today. We look at things like, the metaphor I use a lot is, like we buy people ice cream on Fridays a lot, things like that. Oh, look how much we care about you. We buy you ice cream on Fridays. Well, the average American college student is graduating with like $26,000 of debt. And they're really not doing that for your freaking ice cream on Fridays,
yeah, mm,
how do these people win in your business? How do you help them move forward? And that gets back to a question of what are they here for in the first place? and which raises the bigger issue, what's your business about? How do they plug into that? So I understand how it sounds that way, but I very, very passionately believe that this is if you really it's just like if you have children, how do you show your children you love them? Well, a lot of it is you get up in the morning earlier than you'd like, and you get their food and you get them ready for school, and you do all these things that you don't necessarily enjoy. But that's
Mhm.
if you love your kids, that's what you do. And it's very much the same kind of thing. If you wanna say to your employee you wanna show your employees how much you care about them, shut your door and think seriously about how do they win.
Exactly.
That's showing you care about people. And I really, really think, uh, you know, because I've seen it so much. I've seen it so much that, this is it it the most caring thing you can do for an employee, is just show them, "What do you want?" So
Definitely. No, no, yeah, that completely makes sense, Barry. Completely makes sense because um, it may not because if we haven't experienced it, then it's very easy to make an opinion from the words said. But the experiences, they definitely give a very different picture.
yeah,
So
yeah,
it's it's a very key point, and I think focusing on value, it doesn't mean humanizing. In fact, it might be the most respectful thing we can do as a leader because it clarifies expectations. These
exactly.
clarifications can be harsh. It can be a bit overwhelming.
Yes. Look, I mean, we wanna talk about meaning. Well, meaning is about finding meaning in work and so forth. Well, that's real things, and real things are not necessarily easy things, They take commitment, um, and they're not for everybody, in every level and so forth. Fine. But, but it's, you know, it's at least to show people this is what it is and create those accountabilities around that and creating offering the support as well to help them achieve that. Um, that's I mean, if it's not that, I mean, is I guess the alternative is sitting around and coddling people, "Oh, that's okay," and so forth, and that'll all work right up until the business folds because nobody can deliver, what the customer wants. So, um, and we look at, of course, there are times, for example, people go through difficult things, and so we make exceptions about, accountabilities, from on certain bases. That happens all the time, and that's fine. But,
Mhm.
very often we can do those it can be easy to do that, and we don't stop to think about what impact that has on the people around them who are the real winners carrying the business who have to pick up the slack for that. And you really have to ask look, they have lives. They've got families. Is aren't they employees too? You know? And it's a constant juggling. There's no simple answer around those things. Um, but we can oftentimes what we often call compassion in the workplace is really misdirected to a certain level. And,
Mhm.
when we make excuses and we coddle one person and everybody else has to carry it. And how about just listen, I just think I passionately believe the fairest thing is let's do the hard thinking of coming up with what is it that we need from these people? What do we, what's worth more to them if we get it and so forth, and, help them become successful and then, let's do the best we can to hold people accountable to that because, so that everybody can win. I don't know what's better than that. Really, I don't.
Right. I really understood, and I think um, our listeners, specifically who have actually gone through it, maybe as a leader or as an employee, an unemployed contributor. Let's call all of us as contributors in here.
Yes.
Um, if they have gone through this or they're going through this, they'll definitely understand.
Yeah.
So I think it's a very very crucial point. And you're very much right, Barry, that compassion, empathy, EQ, it has
Uh,
kind been misinterpreted. A lot of misconceptions around it.
yes.
So I mean, definitely, um, we need to address to all of them and try to remove those misconceptions, those misdefinitions in there. And before we wrap up, of course, I know we are short on time, but Barry, if listeners they would like to connect with you to explore on this further and explore more about the value-centric leadership,
Yes.
the nine, you know, uh, the entire framework, what would be the best way?
Well, the quickest thing is they can buy my book on the topic, which is available on Amazon. It's called "It's All in Your Head." The subtitle is "Why Psychology Doesn't Help Your Employees Deliver Value and What Can." So it's on Amazon. Um, and they can also come to my website, which is my company is called Argos HR Solutions LLC. So my website is www.argoshr.com. So it's ARGOSHR.com. And they can, connect with me over that. So yeah, I would love to. I believe very passionately in this, so I'd love to be able to talk to as many people as are interested in about it. So,
Super, super. And I'll make sure to mention all the details and links in the show notes, Barry. And um, I think I believe you have challenged us to strip away the noise and get back to fundamentals, the
yes,
most basic 101, like selecting, developing, rewarding people based not on any abstract trait, but on what they actually deliver.
yes.
I mean, whether we fully agree or not, the idea of value-centric leadership forces us to rethink what effective leadership looks like in today's world. So, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, son. I really, really appreciate the conversation. Really, really fun.
Super, super. And to all the listeners out there, um, it's leadership isn't about chasing trends or leaning on half-baked psychology. It's about asking very simple question: what value are we creating, and how do we lead in a way that makes that possible every day? So, with that, we wrap up this conversation on BizBlend. Until next time, keep questioning assumptions, keep pushing for clarity, and keep blending the lessons of business and life into something meaningful. Until then, this is your host, Sana, signing off. Thank you.